Uh, Fran and Veronica, can you see my slides? Okay, cool. So I'm going to be speaking both to you, but also in the wider context of the recorded sessions here. So it's nice to be with you both this morning. The talk I thought that I would give in the context of how Karen and I talked about it was something I've been working on for quite some time. It's nice to have Juliet with me, a good colleague and friend, and our next presenter. But my name is Frank Niepold. I'm at NOAA at the Climate Program Office at NOAA, but I've also worked at the NOAA level, the interagency level with about 18 federal agencies over the years. I've worked at the international level. I've worked at the national level outside the federal government on climate literacy, recently expanding that to a more proper word, more empowerment. But we're still, this is a very dynamic space, especially right now. So let's jump into it. So whoops, got to get my cursor on the right thing. There we go. So as I thought about your conference and the work that we're doing, I thought it would be helpful for us to frame on a community. And I chose Newark, New Jersey. Newark is an interesting place, has some very unique challenges, has legacy issues that are important. But if you look at this image, you start thinking about that river. That river opens to the ocean eventually, right? And so sea level rise becomes a real issue. But there are other issues that are compounding in there. So one of the things you got to think about in the context of this, I picked up this quote from Governor Baker back in 2019, but the part that's really important, so this was at the House Natural Resources Committee hearing. It was the first climate committee hearing in the House for some time. And what they were talking about was how does the federal government work with states to build climate actions, specifically around resilience and adaptation? And one of that line he said, and what we want to make sure, whatever it is we do, is supported by the local level. If you don't have local support for it, climate action, climate resilience, climate mitigation, you name it, you're not going to succeed at whatever it is you're pursuing, and it won't be sustained over time. One of the things we know for sure is climate mandates sustain transformation for decades and decades and decades, right? What we've built to date is incredibly vulnerable and contributes to the warming of the planet. So that transformation is a long process. It's been long in the transformation to this moment, but it's also got a long trajectory. So building local support is a critical element of this. Juliet, were you with us in Utah? No, you weren't.
Yeah, I was.
Oh, you were, that's right. So this goes back to 2017, where we start digging into, because I've led climate education, community engagement, but we started working with leaders in communities who were really trying to build this transformation. One of the things in this preparation, and this was validated in several meetings over the years, was that climate continues to be a low priority. It's especially when you think about communities like Newark, New Jersey, or communities all over New Jersey, there are other more pressing issues. And when you have other more pressing issues, it's really hard to build sustained support. What about this? What about this? What about this? And there are always credible claims about them. So how you deal with the low priority aspect of something that is urgent is a challenge. Making and sustaining the case for addressing climate change. We're seeing this exactly right now because the Ukraine war and inflation, two real issues, are sapping away the focus. So sustaining that case, oh boy, that's a really important thing, especially in the urban context. And this comes from some work from C40 initiatives. But then also inside communities, we have these amazing enterprises, education, K-12, the largest sector of buildings that any city owns are schools. The most real estate, the most employees, Then you also have universities, community colleges, zoos, aquaria, science centers, nature centers, parks, all within this space. But what we are seeing is that those are not aligned to these grand transformations that are going on in communities. So you're sitting and you have a lot of capacity, but it's laying dormant to deal with these first two pieces. So that sets up an opportunity. That's really what I'm a very focused on this. Now, if you're not aware of something that we do at the federal level under the Global Change Act of 1990, is that we have to produce something called the National Climate Assessment. I've been part of this over the years. NOAA is a lead usually. But climate change offers this quote I found, and this is from the 2018 report. We're in the process of building the 23 report. But it exacerbates existing vulnerabilities in communities across the United States, present a growing challenge to human health, safety, and quality of life, and the rate of economic growth. Things that communities care about. And yet, we continue to not focus on this. So that's the point of why we're having this conversation. We just recently released a new updated assessment of sea level rise. New Jersey, sea level rise is a real issue for New Jersey. It's a real issue. And this assessment that just came out, by the way, all my slides, all the references are in the notes. So if you want to actually go in and dig into these, you can. So the new assessment is by 2100, you have between 2 and 7 feet sea level rise. That's a big range. And you have to think about communities and infrastructure and bridges and roads within the context of what each asset is and how long it will be around and the connections to other aspects. Using precautionary principle, you would tend to think, plan for the worst, be surprised with less. And that's a happy way, which means you're planning for 7 feet. But if you're thinking about something that's gonna be around longer, you're planning more like for 13 feet sea level rise. And the reason why is because there's a lot of these unknowns in the climate system, like how fast will ice transform into the ocean from Antarctica and Greenland? It's, we're still learning that, which means it would put you into a higher projection expectation as opposed to a lower. There's a lot of unknowns in the climate system that we're still grappling with, the rate of these things. But the largest driver of this is the accumulated greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. That's what drives this. And so as we decarbonize, the rate of decarbonization directly relates to the rate of sea level rise. And this is just the 2100. By the way, these models go out to 2200 and 2300. And unfortunately, the sea level rise continues to go up. So for a place like New Jersey, this is a very serious concept to wrestle with and design into your communities. The community implications of this are non-trivial, to say the least. And so how you deal with this is going to require some very important things that when we talk about historically climate science, policy, technology, they missed something really important. This is something that we're working on right now, which is society, people. What do we want to do? Do we understand these issues? What do we hold valuable? So I'm just going to give you a way of putting this into some more geographic context. So NOAA has a product called the Sea Level Rise Viewer. And I get these calls. Actually, I got a call from a guy for some other reason. He said, "Oh, wait, do you have information about sea level rise at NOAA? I couldn't find anything. I was buying a house in Jersey City." And he said, "Should I have bought this house?" Well, I did buy it, but I couldn't find a great way of determining whether or not that house would be vulnerable to sea level rise. I said, "Oh no, here's where you go." And he went there and he went, "Oh no, I should have bought the other house." This is the kind of decision-making people are going to be making. House purchase by house purchase, decision by decision, plot of land by plot of land. But they don't have the tools. They don't know where to go. They don't know how to use them. How much numbers should I use on this? So that's the reason why I showed you that sea level rise projection information, which is over here in some other thing, tells you how far to raise that little blue ball, right? And so what did I say? 7 feet. I said, whoops. So I said, let's go to 8 feet, just to add a little bit. And you see, if you zoom in on Newark, you have some very serious issues. That large blob that's between Newark and Elizabeth, that's the airport. Why are all the airports on the coast vulnerable? Because they were usually put in the flat marshlands or mud flats because they were cheap. But now it turns out to be maybe not the best idea. So you have to move airports. All the land where those airports might go got other stuff going on them. So you've got some serious issues here. But you zoom in a little bit and you can see some serious issues. The Port of Newark, really serious implications. That river clearly is an issue. I don't really know what this area up northeast is. I've probably driven over it many times going to New York City, but it's a non-trivial issue. So you can see, but the key thing is that warming rates drive sea level rise. Which warming rate we get, which relates to which carbon pathway we're on. These are big ideas. These are heady ideas. They take time for people to really seriously think about, understand, connect the dots. It's not small stuff, but that's just sea level rise. This is a project that we work on at NOAA where we're trying to get communities to help their mayors and public health officers get better information on urban heat. Urban heat's the #1 killer of people. And there are things you can do, but you have to understand the details of that. So you can already see Newark, New Jersey did a campaign back in 2002, this last summer. Now the data is still being worked on, but I mean, but you have other places where Philadelphia and Camden, I used to live in Philly, we don't have that information yet. But what turns out is that the scale of these actions and where these vulnerabilities are is actually neighborhood scale. And so, one couple blocks later, you can have 10 degrees different in a day, 10 degrees, sometimes 11 or 12 degrees. And what's going on in that community has a lot to do with tree cover and other factors, whereas over here, and there's a direct relationship between that and redlining. Redlined communities are much more vulnerable to urban heat than non-redlined communities. That's part of why they redlined them, because they were where the trees were. So, so there's equity and justice issues here. But this is an activity that we're doing to try and get people involved in the information so that they can make better decisions that improve their understanding for where they are. As we move this out, this is so that communities are actually much more prepared, understand, participate in the process, and actually move forward on actions that reduce those vulnerabilities, those exposures, and ultimately lead to less death in those communities. So this is the kind of how we do this. So I gave you a lot, but when back in 2010, I was standing in front of a 7th grade classroom, giving a talk similar to this, and a young man in the back of the room asked me a question. Best question I've ever been asked on climate change. Says, so I think I get this, but what I want to know is, are all the jobs going to change? So think about that for a second. 7th grade. I used to teach 7th grade. I loved teaching 7th grade. I'm a middle school teacher. I didn't give you much about my past. I've got a lot of stuff going on in my past that gives me to this moment. But I thought about that question. I was like, first, let me respect you by really thinking about the answer. It's a great question. And what I came up with was, because I'm thinking about him and what he's doing and where he is in his life. In the 7th grade, you're beginning to think about your future. What do I need to prepare for? Do I want to do this? Is that a good idea to do that? Should I do this? I could do this or this. So you're at this moment of inflection and opportunity. And what we've not done is signaled to our youngest generation, what's the future that they should be preparing for? And there is great opportunity and great challenge in front of them. The opportunity is actually what motivates people to really move forward. Sometimes to deal with the challenge, but sometimes to deal straightly with the opportunity. There are going to be jobs that are going to disappear. There are going to be jobs that are going to transform, and there are going to be jobs, whole new jobs that are going to set up. Until they understand what that future looks like, they won't really understand which courses you take, which majors you take, which internships you take, which, majors, minors, degrees, accreditations, jobs. And these are really important things. So now I'm a federal civil servant at NOAA. One of the things that's important to us is this executive order 14008, which came out on the 27th of January of 2021. And what President Biden did in that executive order was said, this is an all of government approach, all of government, to deal with and tackle the climate crisis at home and abroad. And so, that's marshaling that all of government approach is something that I've been working on for quite some time. But back to that seventh grader's question, when you think of climate job, most people think about this: solar panel installer and wind turbine. It took me a long time to find one image that had both solar panels and wind turbines in it, but I found it. But you think about this image, right? You're like, but that's only a piece of it. It's only a little piece of it. Yes, solar and wind are going to play a critical role, but that's just a piece. There's actually much more here than we think about. And I do agree with the president that when you think about climate change, you think about jobs, 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 because actually that is the truth, that there are way more jobs in solving climate change than letting climate change rip through the economy, way more. And is also better for communities and health outcomes and well-being, so why not? But this is a park in Queens, and what they're doing is they're beginning the transformation of the coastline where the river and the city meet. And this is a park where they've started designing berms and ways for water to absorb as tide tides and storm surge come in to transform that coastline, multi-use space, parks. But the people who were moving the earth around this were actually doing a climate job. They're in a bulldozer or something like that. But the people who are designing that bridge, that's a climate job now. The people who are doing all the vegetation in here and trying to figure out how do you redesign a community where you do have a coastal community designed to thrive in the context of the ocean touching the coast, but also not as vulnerable as before. So this is just, but you see there's a lot more of this to go. And remember that image in Newark, that wasn't there. So that had full exposure with storm surge and inland extreme precipitation. So just getting you, so this is some of the findings that the meeting that Juliet and I were in, and subsequent meetings. But in order for this to happen, we need public support to advance this, both policy and social transformation. We need a workforce, just as we were talking about, to implement these climate actions. We need the public to participate in this process so it centers in equity and justice, because there's a lot of change that's coming. And in that change, you can either affirm social inequities or you can address those inequities. That's social process, but people have to be engaged in the process. Go back to what Governor Baker said. If you want to do something for a long time at the local level, you have to have support. You have to build that support. And we're seeing this when we're looking at climate actions, whether it's in New Jersey. I know of issues in New York where the people in communities are like, yeah, that's a great idea. And then they don't like the implementation. That means you have to stay engaged. You have to participate. You have to push it. And also, and Julia, this is a new word for me. We have to transform our education system. I'm actually, from 2017 till now, I've actually gotten to transformation, because what's happening right now in our schools, whether it's higher education, some of this transformation is already happening, but what's going on right now is really not preparing our young people for what they need to do for their entire life. And just tweaks. I thought I was going to be in a tweak mode for a long time. It's not working. It's just not working. We have to do much more significant transformations. Most students in this country do not learn anything about the Earth system in any significant, deep way. All too often, a student will go to a true climate change course in their junior year of college and feel completely set up. They're like, what? I've heard this story over and over and over again. My job is to know what this is at a national scale. Juliet, do you teach climate courses at college level? Have you had this experience where a student's like, wait a minute, I don't know what you're talking about. This is important, and I didn't know anything about this before I came to this class.
I think, to be honest with you, the younger generation I'm seeing today is walking into the classroom, at least in Massachusetts, is walking into the classroom already really worried about this issue and really worried about their future. And that's different than it was a few years ago.
Awesome. Well,
yeah,
not
almost,
awesome. It's awesome and not
yeah.
awesome at the same time, right? I was just with a young student who's really activated in San Diego. And one of the things I asked her was, she is absolutely concerned, but her skill in the precision of the issues isn't actually, she's concerned because she's getting her information not from a formal educator. She's getting it from media. I asked her, where are you getting your concern from? You're right, but where are you getting it from? And she's getting it from news and YouTube and other sources. But professional educators are not involved in the equation, and that has a lot of problems. So, but then the other thing is, if we're going to actually effectively address climate change, we must build the social capacity. If we're going to build the social capacity, but build the momentum to actually deal with this, because time is not our friend here. We've been delaying a lot of these transformations for a very long time. But at the same time, there have been advances that started back in, Eunice Foote's paper was delivered to AAAS in 1856, saying that, building up carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is going to lead to a warmer climate. 1856. Svante Arrhenius, 1889. Keep on going. The first electric car, the first solar cell, all of these things have been long in the works. It's about now putting them into a social transformation at scale within time is actually where we are. So just that gives you some sense of this. So in order for this to happen, where we are thinking is that for the longest time, climate science led to better decisions or good. It's not true. I represent the climate science community. And the problem is that it's an incomplete equation. The community plays an incredibly powerful role in what we do in how communities deal with climate action. Education plays a critical role. Over the years, the private sector has played a larger role in the climate science and the climate technology community have appreciated that. But the education sector, and I mean all forms of education, play a huge role in this social transformation. And so, I'm just making a case here. When you think of climate solutions, think more like this. And there's even more. This is just one articulation of that. The quantity of climate solutions available to us and the diversity of sectors across society, whether industry, power, land, education, I'm missing one, transportation, anyway, is very vast. And so it has a place for so many people to be part of this. So you think about whether it's electricity, food and agriculture, land use, industry, transportation, buildings, land sinks, got to strengthen them, coastal sinks, engineered sinks, but also health and education play a critical role in this solving. So this is like an all of society approach. So when I think about all of this, the past isn't a great predictor. How are we going to do this? When are we going to do this? We still feel like we're not totally transforming, and we're not We're not there yet. There are places that are starting to emerge this way. So when back in 2019, there was this report that was released by an organization of networks called America's Pledge. And when they looked at the American climate action environment, including states, cities, businesses, faith organizations, university and healthcare organizations, there's just one set of actors. What they found was that 65% of the US economy was committed to climate action. So as the largest economy in the world, 65% of the largest economy in the world is larger than China's economy. So that's a surprising story, that the United States is already well under the way to taking on this tackling it. But what you take away from this picture is it's uneven, very uneven. What's going on in Wyoming is radically different than what's going on in New Jersey. New Jersey, I can't even see New Jersey. There's so much action in the way this map is generated. Now, obviously, if you zoom down into a state level, you would see that there's unevenness, but there's state level and sub-state level actions. So what that says to me is that there's a lot of opportunity to strengthen and perhaps accelerate actions at those scales if we take some of the warnings and some of the opportunities that we talked about here, build local support. I've talked to many communities where they have a climate change officer, a sustainability officer. These are new jobs, by the way. Remember that 7th grader said, are there going to be any new jobs? A climate change officer at a city is a new job. A sustainability officer has been around a little bit of a while, but a climate change officer, whether it's mitigation or adaptation, that's a new job, but they are deeply understaffed. And they do not have the capacity, nor do they have the program capability to engage their community robustly. They need help, they need partnership, and that's one of the things we're looking at as we move forward here. So I'm thinking I love this image for a lot of reasons, but I want you to think about this image for a second. In New Jersey is committed to 60+% of its future electricity being made from offshore wind. You have 0 right now, 0. There are only 5 working offshore wind turbines in the country, and they are all off a block island in Rhode Island. 5. The amount of wind turbines that are going up in New Jersey is massive in time. But just off of Newport, Massachusetts, the first major offshore wind farm is going. So the port of Newport, Rhode Island is just starting. Within 2 years, all of that will begin. The port is already being rebuilt. There's a community college in New Bedford that has a program to give an associate's degree for offshore wind, that a technician would come out and they could walk right into a job. This year, in the fall, 2021, if they started that year, they would finish at the time when they would start hiring. You know how many students were in that program? It's an amazing program. I've talked with them often. 10. One of the realities we have here is that the human capital, I'm not a big fan of that, but this is the way the LinkedIn report described it. The human capital is one of the biggest limitings of our climate targets. We have these ambitious, grand, important climate commitments and targets. However, we don't have the people to fulfill them because we didn't engineer the people side in time with the start. So New Bedford, Massachusetts, that is a canary in the coal mine for me, because New Jersey has the same exact problem. You don't have community colleges and career and technical high schools that are building programs right now that are going to time their graduates with when these jobs are coming. These jobs are coming. I know where the port is. I know where the service ports are. I know, where the fields are. The federal government plays a role in the permitting of all these fields. All of this is coming. But what we don't have yet is the education system aligning to this. And there's another part to this puzzle. If a community college builds a program on offshore wind technologist, are the families going to go, yes, let's send our kid to community college instead of a 4-year degree? Yeah, that's really, because if you build a program and nobody enrolls, we have a problem. The amount of people it's going to take to do this work, the social transformation in New Jersey, is much larger than what we're designed to do. So there's a whole campaign with the families to get them excited about it. Let me just paint you a picture. Beach replenishment, important part of resilience. Remember Sandy, I think it was Cape May, had just finished rebuilding their dunes when Sandy came roaring up the coast. Other communities had not. Those dunes being replenished set up a very different flooding experience for those communities in New Jersey when they were replenished, when they weren't. A person who sits on that boat and actually dredges sand from the bottom up onto the dune can make upwards of $250,000 a year for 9 months' work. They have a hard time finding people who know how to actually use tools anymore. But they could make $250,000 for 9 months. I'm not just using money but it's family. I've got kids who are going to college. What are they going to study? What are they going to come out with debt? And all that kind of stuff, right? A boom operator. So when you put up a huge wind turbine, the boom, that is like there's a crane involved that puts the gearbox up on top of the podium. 1 year's training, paid, usually in Texas, makes well over $100,000 right out of high school. $100,000, 1 year paid training, $100,000 a year at least. You got to be good at it. But I'm just giving you, there's a new reality that's coming that we are just not lining up all the pieces to happen in concert in time. In 2009, when we did the TARP funds, we did put a lot of money into training for solar. The problem is that the timing wasn't right because there wasn't enough solar being installed. And so a lot of these people had skills that they didn't actually find jobs. You got to get it all worked out. So, and what that says to me is you need a plan so that this image is a reality. So just to give you some sense of that, there's some trend data that the adaptation and resilience jobs are much harder to describe, and something that we're working actively on with partnerships to figure out what those jobs are, how many there are, how do we design programs to actually build the competencies. But we know, and all this information is on the slides and I can share it with you all. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out all the threads that need to come together to make a tapestry that's worth looking at. Hopefully I've done that for you today, but the jobs picture is robust. It's starting to become even more robust, but the programs that line up to the jobs aren't there yet. And hopefully we can, over the next couple of years, build much more coherence in this at a federal, state, and sub-state level. When I think about New Jersey, I think about offshore wind and the jobs that come with that. So I'm like Biden, but different, right? It's not just climate jobs. It's offshore wind in New Jersey jobs. And the capacity, remember that boom operator I was talking about? See that little crane that's putting that up there? There's a little box over there that's got a person in it. That person is interesting. Who's sitting in that crane, operating, but this is kind of what this looks like when you put in an offshore wind turbine. Always people think about the person standing up on top of the gearbox, like the image I gave you. That's not always the jobs. When I was talking with my 19-year-old son about this, there's actually another job, which is there's a boat that lays the power line from the turbines to the shore. That's a different job. Then there are the people that are, I was talking with a young man in New Jersey who's in the AmeriCorps, and he's trying to figure out what he would do next. And I said, look, and he loved education, community engagement. I said, look, the first thing that's going to happen in New Jersey is there's going to be a lot of community meetings about do we support offshore wind, and where those power lines come into the communities, and all the hesitance about, can we see the turbines? You can't. And if you could, it would be beautiful, but that's ideology that I hold, that not everyone does. But there's a lot of community process. That's a job. And so, you know, this is where the wind fields are. And, you know, as you notice, that it goes from Maine definitely down to North Carolina, maybe a little bit in South Carolina, a little bit of southern Texas, and then the West Coast as well. This is where the wind fields are. That is, so the conversation we're having about New Jersey, it's not just New Jersey. It goes all the way up and down the coast. So this gives you where the actual sited wind fields are currently and where they're going. And you can see that green one up by Rhode Island and the blue one by Massachusetts. But then you can see that big orange one in New Jersey. That's the one I'm talking about. Just to give you an example, one instance. And this is where the port is. So just across the river from the Philadelphia airport is where the New Jersey wind port is. So all those big gearboxes sitting there are going to be going out to the shore from that wind port, just across the river from the Philadelphia airport. That all that work is part of this. Just to give you another picture. So back to that seventh grader's question. Yes, but they don't know it. They don't know where all of this is going, but they don't know what to prepare for. And they don't know the opportunities because, as Juliet said, and you're right, Juliet, young people are learning about this. It's just not in their classrooms. And they're getting, and if you remember, I don't know if you caught the teenage anxiety report that came out by the Surgeon General. He clearly named climate change as one of the contributing factors to their anxiety. So we know that actually one of the ways that you deal with that anxiety is you take that and you put it into action. You enact the thing and you address the thing that you're anxious about. It is completely appropriate to be anxious about climate change. It is devastating if we don't act enough. So transforming that anxiety and that depression into action is actually one of the ways that you deal with this. So we must support our young people in seeing that they actually have a call for in the future to prepare for, to be part of, because whether you're talking transportation, electricity, power, land, you name it, those transformations are going to require very different skills, different people than what we have right now. So we have deep capabilities, but they're bigger than just education, right? Because remember, parents and what they support. Will the parents in New Jersey go, yes, I want my kid to go to an offshore wind training program? We need thousands and thousands and thousands of people to do this work. But that only works if the parents are like, yes, I'm really excited about your future going to a community college or a career and technical high school. But you know, we see a lot of the public opinion. We can track that. We can understand it. We have different organizations involved in all these levels of activity, but we don't have a plan of how we're working there. So this is just one of my favorite slides about different organizations that are working in this space. And you know, Juliet, I didn't put some of the work you're doing on here, but this is just a sample. And there's a lot of major efforts going on right now all over the country that we're trying to work with New Jersey and the Department of Education to support the First Lady's bold initiatives on how to transform New Jersey climate education systems to support exactly what we're talking about. So New Jersey should be incredibly proud of the First Lady's initiatives and the Department of Education's response, because they're really doing heavy, deep lifting, because to transform education systems is a non-trivial task. So this is from the website. I've been actively working with the Department of Education in Jersey on how to build these resources and support teachers in doing not adding, because as a former teacher, you can't add anything to my plate. My cup runneth over. You have to change what's on the plate. And you can still do an amazing job in teaching and make sure that kids have the skills, competencies, and agency to actually be part of this work for the rest of their life, because that's what's coming. And we have resources. We've helped them. We've given them these different partnership models and supported them. But ultimately, it's about weaving these capabilities together, whether it's education, training, workforce, public awareness, into a rapid all-of-society approach to supporting New Jersey, United States, and the world's climate actions as we address the absolute urgent issue of climate change in our time. So that's where I'm going to stop. I don't know how much time do I have left, but I'm more than happy. We have a small group. I'm happy to answer any questions, clarify any points as I hand over the baton to Juliet.
You have until 11:10, just to let you know. So you have 14 more minutes
Okay.
for questions
Okay.
and stuff like that.
Perfect. That's so hopefully I've stimulated some questions or some comments or however you want to go, but let it rip.
Fran here. What
Yeah,
was
hey, Fran.
urban heat? Urban heat, you said #1 killer. What does that mean?
So when a heat wave comes to a community, so you have a large heat dome sitting over an area for multiple days.
I see.
And, you know, and just to be clear, let's think about that scenario for a second. If you are elderly and don't have a lot of financial resource, you're sitting in a community, you might be in a building where you don't want to turn on the air conditioner because it's expensive. And you go multiple days. And the nights are warming faster than days. The night temperature, you don't get it cooling. So your body builds an accumulated stress because the day heat, you're like, wow, that was really hot. And the night isn't cold. You don't have any cooling effect.
Yeah.
And the next day hot, and the next night hot. And so that eventually builds. But one of the most important things you can do in a heat wave, besides understanding and having all the cooling centers and trees and all that kind of stuff, is actually check on people who you know are vulnerable and invite them to come into a cooler place to get a break. That actually helps people more than anything else. And their programs, New York City has got a really amazing program to actually, but it's community work. It's people checking in on people, helping them. That last bit is actually what keeps somebody from dying. It takes time to grow trees. It takes time to build in these programs, but actually checking in on people is one of the most important things you can do. At the end of the day, this is social stuff. It's not policy, it's not technology. Those are important. I'm not diminishing them, but it's not sufficient. Because at the end of the day, the stuff we do, the stuff we understand, how we work together is actually what keeps these outcomes much more likely to be favorable. And there's a nice model that we're looking at right now of thriving or well-being, in which your well-being models show suffering, struggling, well-being, or thriving. And you can move through this. Climate change is a downward pressure that pushes people towards suffering. And what we do can actually counteract that to move more towards thriving. At the end of the day, we need thriving communities that are that have effectively dealt with this issue in spite of it. So, you know, all right, that's a long answer. Sorry.
Cool. Very good. Thank you.
I'm a long answer. Any other questions?
I tutor in a school in Trenton, part of Mercer County Community College. And, this is great information. I can tell these students, hey, all right, you don't make it to college, you don't do 4 years, but there's jobs out there that, you could do, get out of your phone and, get using your hands and learn some new skills.
So Fran, I'm on the science advisory board for a science center in Baltimore. And they had this event where they were like makerspace. And they took all these old big tower computers and they put them on a table and they put some tools out there and said, let's take these apart and really start examining them. The first tool they picked up, these kids, was a hammer. And the people behind it were like, see these little things called screws? You just unscrew these things and then you slide this off and then expose it. You know, unfortunately, we just don't have kids that really know tools very well. And so
Right.
that's actually, I was the story about the beach replenishment. The guy who was doing it was having a hard time finding people who knew how to use hand tools. Because when you're working with pumping systems and pipes and electrical systems, and you got to replace them and fix them when they start breaking, it's like, I can't find anybody who knows how to use hand tools. Everybody's just, you know, like, God, I feel like a grandfather at the moment. Sorry, but you know, like kids these days. But you know,
Right.
actually, it's got some truth in it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, my dad was a machinist, so I grew up, you know, he bought us the erector set, and, you know, we're always handling screws. I dealt with my own bicycle and stuff. And, you know, my kids, they're just even asking me how to use the phone, you know, back when they were new at this. So, yeah, there's a lot to be said about that. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions, points you want to explore?
Frank, I'm curious just about an update or what you see, if anything, in terms of, I mean, obviously that NOAA is definitely working on accelerating climate action and climate change education, but I'm wondering like what you're seeing at the federal level or national level in terms of strengthening networks, bringing people together in a more formal and funded way. Or is that something that,
So, I mean, as I said in my early remarks, one of the challenges that have just come in is, so, you know, if you follow the federal budget, right, the FY22 budget was delayed. So it was supposed to land October 1. We just got it last week. But right as they were finalizing those budget decisions, Ukraine, war, support, and inflation was really taking a bite. So a lot of what should have happened, and there had been months in the process, didn't happen. So you watched an evaporation of a lot of those key investments just disappeared right at the last minute. That's hard. But one of the things that I did, and you know, I'm shifting my function role because I'm seeing a gap in a need, is when I look at the federal architecture of programs, we identified 438 programs across 19 departments and agencies. Agencies you wouldn't think about: HUD, transportation, labor, that are doing climate-related education, training, public awareness, public participation, public access to climate information. That's a very large ecosystem. In order to line up those programs, build communities of practice and coordination, and really look at gaps and opportunities for collaboration to do things together, is something I'm working on actively. You know, I can share with you a report that we did and just released last month of where those programs are and all, you know. But the next level, actually, Juliet, is what we're seeing. I don't know why I'm picking on Newark, New Jersey, but I am. Is there are places where multiple agencies will make investments in a community. Like NASA will do this, and then NOAA will do these two things, and then FEMA will do these two things, and then EPA will do this. And they're working in similar issues and topics. And yet they have no idea that they're making coincident investments in communities, perhaps even with the same organizations, but they have no knowledge that this richness of opportunity sits not based on what was proposed, but what they could do with what is being implemented. And so, you know, there are new tools that are needed, new capabilities. So, you know, API mining of grants.gov, something I'm looking at. We're trying to marshal the resources. I mean, that the omnibus decisions just sucked all the resourcing to make these new things happen. We'll figure it out. You know, we've got enough money. We should it's going to be slower. But until we start seeing where the opportunities for collaboration and networking are, Salesforce has got some robust tools that can actually use AI techniques to, to pull in, because I hope everyone can appreciate the complexities of how much information we're talking about. It's huge. It's beyond my brain. And I've been a coordinator for 15 years. I usually can track a lot. I've just hit a new level where it's just like completely beyond my cognitive ability, because I can't see the amount of efforts that are going on in this country just because of my knowledge and my relationships. It's beyond me. So we are working actively to get there. Juliet, I wish we were already there, but I do see tremendous promise. There's one other thing that I am still looking at, and that is remember I was saying there are these deep capabilities in communities to accelerate climate action from the social side. One of the things we know is true is that the thing that actually makes the most difference isn't a grant to this science center or to this school district or that. It's actually an organization who's building shared understanding of what we could do together and communities of practice against what is and what is enhanced. But that entity is more of a community organizing entity, a coordinating entity, a backbone entity, where we see those organically positioned across the country. And there are a couple communities where that has just naturally showed up. The kinds of transformations you can get in the social side is much more significant than you can in the without that. So that effort, and then investing in communities across the country and then networking them so they can share information and learning. That architecture is something that I'm very excited about. I see tremendous potential, and I'm not exactly sure who's going to fund it. I'm an equal opportunity approacher. I'll let anybody have this idea, whether it's the federal government, whether it's a philanthropic entity like Gates or Bloomberg, or who's the other one I was thinking? Oh, the Earth Fund by Bezos. Somebody could make a huge difference here to actually activate those latent capabilities in communities through coordination and community organizing, as opposed to projects. So, if there's anybody on the call who wants to talk about this further, I'm eager. I see tremendous potential. And then the last point, Juliet, is we know from the work we did under the Obama administration that the convening power of the White House is an incredibly powerful tool. But the problem is the pandemic has kind of kept that at bay. Digital engagement is okay, but there's no replacing face-to-face, deep, substantive conversations. And so convening power is something that I'm definitely eager for us to get back to using much more robustly as the pandemic lessons, whether it's at state level, national level, but it's untapped capability that I'm watching, trying to figure out how to activate again. That was a long answer. Sorry, Juliet. It's not like I haven't been thinking about this. Any other questions?
Thanks, Frank. That's very good.
All right.
We're basically right at the end. Yeah, we have 1 more minute.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. Well, looks like Juliet